Canada stands at a critical juncture, facing decisions that will shape its national security posture, its international alliances, and its very relevance on the global stage for decades to come. Central to this complex web of strategic considerations is the long-debated often controversial and increasingly vital acquisition of the F-35 Lightning to Joint Strike Fighter. The recent federal election, resulting in a victory for Mark Carney's Liberal Party, has injected fresh uncertainty into an already fraught political and military landscape. While the exact composition of the new government, whether a stable majority or a precarious minority reliant on support from other parties, remains to be finalized, the tremors of the election have already sent shockwaves through the nation's defense establishment. This political instability arrives at a moment demanding clarity and resolve, as Canada confronts an international environment marked by rising aggression, renewed great power competition, and profound technological shifts in warfare. The question echoing through Ottawa's corridors is no longer simply if Canada needs a new fighter jet, but whether the nation possesses the political will to follow through on existing commitments in the face of domestic pressures and a rapidly darkening global outlook. Why, even amidst potential diplomatic friction with its primary ally, the United States, does Canada seem inexorably bound to the F-35 program? The answer lies in a confluence of unavoidable strategic realities, the stark limitations of alternatives, and the potentially devastating consequences of continued hesitation. The recent federal election campaign and its outcome have laid bare the deep divisions and shifting allegiances within the Canadian electorate, creating a complex backdrop for critical defense decisions. Mark Carney's Liberals emerged victorious, poised to form the next government, yet the mandate they received is far from unambiguous. The prospect of a minority government potentially requiring informal or formal alliances with parties further to the left, such as the significantly weakened New Democratic Party, introduces immediate complexities. Parties holding the balance of power often extract policy concessions, and historically, robust defense spending and large-scale military procurement projects have not been top priorities for the Canadian left. The election results represented a significant political realignment, described by some commentators as an earthquake. The Conservative Party, despite receiving notable, albeit perhaps indirect, encouragement from figures like Donald Trump south of the border, failed to make anticipated gains and even lost ground in some areas. More dramatically, the NDP suffered a catastrophic decline, losing a substantial number of seats and potentially falling below the threshold required for official party status in Parliament. This fragmentation and weakening of opposition forces might seem, on the surface, to strengthen the Liberals' hand. However, governing effectively, especially in a minority situation, often requires building consensus and navigating delicate political compromises. Major defense expenditures, like the multi-billion-dollar F-35 program, are frequently targets for fiscal scrutiny and political horse trading, particularly when social spending priorities compete for limited government resources. This political flux occurs precisely when Canada can least afford indecision. The global strategic environment is arguably more dangerous and unpredictable than at any point since the Cold War's height. Russia's revanchist actions in Europe, China's assertive expansionism in the Indo-Pacific and globally, instability in the Middle East, and the pervasive threats of cyber warfare and terrorism demand capable, well-equipped, and interoperable military forces. For a nation like Canada, with vast territory, extensive coastlines, significant Arctic responsibilities, and deep commitments to collective security through NATO and NORAD, a coherent and credible defense policy is not a luxury but a fundamental necessity. The political vacuum, or even the perception of instability following the election, risks amplifying Canada's long-standing Achilles heel in defense matters of repeals and postponement and strategic ambiguity, often autually, unspomment, unspopodii uarum balskinin. to a pluckity and all take allowance, a playly and supplyly at a pissy and supply to if so on sinkade to me and sick goodbye a bags, I gickle with a piga, it is a kisso, sick a piga, this likes, a quick a goodbye, a paru to aka to sit to it a kata, skip a tabi, aka, by a wait, you lurk, stop, well, raise a cigar, well, I'll dab and sipper, I went at the boy, so good, it's a boy. Now the cases are flexible. There was like a stiff style on with them dead. Got bloody wood, except for some The decision, formally taken in 2022, after years of political wrangling and multiple procurement process, restarts. To acquire 88 F-35A fighter jets was a landmark moment for Canadian defense policy. It signaled an intention, however belated, to replace the Royal Canadian Air Force's aging fleet of CF-18 Hornets aircraft that entered service in the 1980s and are now operating well beyond their originally intended lifespan. These venerable jets, while upgraded incrementally over the years, are increasingly difficult and expensive to maintain and lack the capabilities required to operate effectively in modern, contested airspace. They belong, as the video bluntly suggests, in museums, not on the front lines of national defense or allied operations. The challenges facing the RCAF extend far beyond equipment obsolescence. A persistent and worsening pilot shortage plagues the force, driven by demanding operational tempos, competition from civilian airlines, and perhaps a perceived lack of long-term investment and vision. Training pipelines struggle to keep pace with attrition rates. Simultaneously, the maintenance infrastructure supporting the legacy CF-18 fleet is reportedly stretched to the breaking point, impacting aircraft availability and operational readiness. This trifecta of aging platforms, insufficient personnel, and strained logistics creates significant vulnerabilities, particularly concerning Canada's sovereign responsibilities in the vast and increasingly strategic Arctic region. The northern airspace, a critical avenue of approach to North America, remains dangerously under-monitored and difficult to defend effectively with current capabilities. Against this backdrop, the F-35 is presented not as a gold-plated option or a superfluous indulgence, but as the baseline requirement for Canada to fulfill its core defense mandates, its advanced stealth characteristics, sophisticated sensor suite, and unparalleled networking capabilities are deemed essential for 1. Territorial defense and sovereignty, effectively patrolling Canada's vast airspace, including the increasingly contested Arctic, and deterring or responding to intrusions. 2. NORAD commitments, maintaining Canada's contribution to the North American Aerospace Defense Command alongside the United States, a cornerstone of continental defense for over 6 decades. NORAD modernization is urgently needed to counter new threats like hypersonic missiles and advanced cruise missiles. And the F-35 is the platform around which future NORAD air defense architecture is being built. 3. NATO interoperability, ensuring Canadian forces can seamlessly operate alongside key allies, particularly the US and European NATO members, almost all of whom are operating or acquiring the F-35. Shared platforms, tactics, and data links are crucial for effective coalition warfare. The F-35, therefore, represents the minimum investment required for Canada to remain a credible partner in its own defense and within its key alliances. Delaying or canceling the program would not merely postpone modernization. It would actively degrade Canada's ability to protect its interests and meet its international obligations. Despite the clear strategic imperatives underpinning the F-35 acquisition, the post-election political environment has already seen concerning signals emerge, even before the final vote counts were certified. Sources close to the newly victorious Liberal leadership began floating familiar narratives about the need to review acquisition priorities, reallocate defense funding, and focus on domestic innovation. In the coded language of Canadian politics, such pronouncements are often the harbinger of delays, scope reductions, or outright cancellations of major defense projects. The pattern is well established. Invoke the need for fiscal prudence or Canadian-made solutions as a justification for scaling back commitments made by previous governments or even by earlier iterations of the same party. The risk is that the Carney government, potentially seeking to appease factions within its own caucus or necessary coalition partners, might view the F-35 program as a politically expedient target for budget cuts or delays. This could manifest in several ways: a reduction in the number of aircraft purchased, an extension of the delivery timeline, or a combination of both. While presented as responsible fiscal management, such moves would inevitably undermine the operational effectiveness of the RCAF and weaken Canada's standing among its allies. The argument often raised by critics that Canada could achieve similar capabilities more affordably with alternative aircraft, such as the Swedish Saab Gripen E, collapses under scrutiny. The Gripen, while a capable 4.5 generation fighter, simply does not possess the core attributes that make the F-35 a 5th generation platform: advanced, low observable design, integrated sensor fusion providing unparalleled situational awareness, and the ability to network seamlessly with other allied assets in a high-threat environment. These are not minor technical differences. They represent a fundamental generational leap in air combat capability deemed essential for survival and effectiveness against modern adversaries. Furthermore, the notion that choosing the Gripen would enhance Canadian sovereignty or reduce dependence on the United States is demonstrably false. The Gripen E relies heavily on critical U.S.-sourced components, including its engine, radar elements, and weaponry systems. Its export and operational use are subject to U.S. approval through mechanisms like the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. Opting for the Gripen would merely substitute one form of reliance for another, while simultaneously sacrificing the crucial interoperability that comes with operating the same platform as Canada's primary allies. Abandoning the F-35 program would, paradoxically, lead to greater strategic isolation for Canada, not enhanced autonomy. The practical result would be a weaker RCAF, unable to fully integrate with its most important partners, gaining only a hollow rhetorical victory at the expense of tangible capability. The debate surrounding the F-35 transcends mere fiscal considerations or platform versus platform comparisons. It strikes at the heart of Canada's strategic alignment and its credibility as an ally in an increasingly dangerous world. The return of Donald Trump to the U.S. presidency adds another layer of complexity and urgency. During his first term, Trump consistently expressed impatience with NATO allies perceived as failing to meet their defense spending commitments. Specifically, the guideline of allocating 2% of GDP to defense. He often framed alliances in transactional terms, questioning the value of defending nations that weren't paying their fair share. While the rhetoric may sometimes be hyperbolic, the underlying pressure is real and unlikely to dissipate. Under a second Trump administration, or indeed under any U.S. administration facing global challenges and domestic budget pressures, scrutiny of allied burden sharing will likely intensify. Canada, having spent decades underinvesting in its military under successive liberal and conservative governments and consistently falling short of the 2% target, is particularly vulnerable to such criticism. The Trudeau government, despite some increases in defense spending, largely continued this trend of prioritizing other files over fundamental military recapitalization. Hesitation or backtracking on the F-35 program by the Carney government would send a deeply damaging signal to Washington and other NATO capitals. It would be interpreted not just as fiscal caution, but as a lack of seriousness about defense commitments and a continued willingness to free ride on the security provided by allies, primarily the United States. The potential consequences could be severe and tangible. Reduced intelligence sharing. Access to high-level U.S. and Five Eyes intelligence could be restricted if Canada is not seen as pulling its weight or operating compatible. Secure systems. Exclusion from planning. Canada might find itself sidelined from key allied strategic planning and operational coordination efforts. Loss of influence. Canada's voice and influence within NATO, NORAD, and other international security forums could diminish significantly. Economic penalties, while less direct. Sustained underinvestment could impact defense industrial cooperation and potentially even broader trade relationships if perceived as a lack of commitment to shared security burdens. In essence, failing to proceed decisively with the F-35 program risks confirming the perception of Canada as a strategic laggard, content to rely on others for its security while failing to make the necessary investments itself. This is particularly risky given the evolving threats in Canada's own neighborhood. The Arctic is no longer a frozen, quiet periphery. It is an arena of growing geopolitical competition. Russia is remilitarizing its Arctic territories, testing North American defenses with increasing frequency. China, declaring itself a near-Arctic state, is expanding its icebreaker fleet and investing heavily in polar research and resource access routes. Defending Canadian sovereignty and contributing to continental security in this changing environment requires advanced capabilities that the aging CF-18s cannot provide, and that the F-35 is specifically designed to deliver. Moreover, the very nature of warfare is changing. The proliferation of hypersonic missiles, the increasing sophistication of cyber and electronic warfare, the integration of artificial intelligence into military systems, and the importance of space-based assets all point towards a future battlefield where technological superiority, networked operations, and information dominance are paramount. The F-35, as a flying sensor node and network enabler, is designed for this future operating environment. Continuing to rely on legacy systems amounts to preparing for the last war, not the next one. The world, as the video starkly suggests, appears to be re-entering an era where hard power matters significantly, and military capability is a prerequisite for national security and international influence. In such a world, disarming or failing to modernize is not a virtuous act of peace-seeking. It is a dangerous signal of weakness. Mark Carney and his new Liberal government inherit a defense file laden with challenges, but also presenting a clear, albeit difficult, choice regarding the nation's future air combat capability. The strategic rationale for the F-35, despite the program's cost and past controversies, has only grown stronger amidst the deteriorating global security situation and the pressing need for RCAF modernization. The alternatives are demonstrably less capable and offer no real advantage in terms of national sovereignty or reduced reliance on the U.S. The new Prime Minister essentially faces two paths. 1. The path of resolve. Fully embrace the F-35 program as a critical national security investment. Work to accelerate the delivery schedule where possible. Prioritize the necessary investments in personnel, training, infrastructure, and NORAD modernization to support the new fleet effectively. This path requires political courage to defend the expenditure against domestic critics and demonstrates a clear commitment to allies and to Canada's own defense. It acknowledges the harsh realities of the current global environment and positions Canada as a serious security partner. 2. The path of hesitation. Succumb to the familiar Canadian pattern of delay and ambiguity. Engage in protracted reviews, reduce the number of aircraft purchased, stretch out timelines, and prioritize short-term fiscal optics over long-term strategic capability. This path might offer temporary political relief, but would ultimately repeat the mistakes of the past, further erode the RCAF's capabilities, damage relations with key allies, and leave Canada increasingly irrelevant and vulnerable in critical regions like the Arctic. It would confirm the Trudeau-era legacy of military decline as enduring state policy. The stakes could not be higher. The F-35's decision is more than just about acquiring fighter jets. It is about whether Canada intends to remain a capable actor, able to defend its sovereignty, contribute meaningfully to collective security, and safeguard its interests in a world where the rules-based order is under increasing strain and the calculus of power is shifting rapidly. If Canada, under its new leadership, chooses hesitation over resolve, It risks not only canceling a vital military program, but also signaling the end of its ambition to be a nation fully capable of defending itself and standing shoulder to shoulder with its allies in a new and dangerous era of If Canada, under its new leadership, chooses hesitation over resolve, it risks not only canceling a vital military program, but also signaling the end of its ambition to be a nation fully capable of defending itself and standing shoulder to shoulder with its allies in a new and dangerous era of international relations. The world and Canada's allies are watching attentively. A failure to proceed decisively with the F-35 could be interpreted as a definitive statement about Canada's future role, one of diminished capacity and fading relevance.